but you'll find it in other kind of configurations and terminologies in the literature, is a perspective which emphasizes much more issues like cultural identity, multidimensionality, on another kind of development, another approach, another understanding of development. So development should no longer be, or not only be looked at as an economic kind of process. In communication, we have distinguished different perspectives, but I would like to group them under two broad areas, and one being a more top-down perspective, which comes in different titles and concepts. The two-step flow is being referred to in certain parts of the literature, extension approaches, the diffusion of innovations. All these strategies and perspectives are still very much offered, and I'm sure that some of you who are taking these courses are expected to read and study these. There is a second and a more alternative kind of perspective which has gained some headway, and that's in my own writing summarized under the concept of participatory model. It starts at the other end of the spectrum. It was one of the outcomes of what was debated in communication science, the cultural studies perspective, the emphasis on the consumer, the audience rather than the producer, the communicator. And that perspective, once again, has different kind of implications and backgrounds. Now, we see, if we look at the literature and research done in different areas, that in the first period, period studied, and I refer to work done by others, 1958, 1986, the so-called modernization perspective was also very prominent, available in the literature, in the research being done. It examined the relevance of media content and messages. It was, of course, looking at comparative ways of analyzing, and it had a major interest in policy research and recommending certain trajectories, certain ways of handling not only communication in theory, but also in applied ways. In the second period, 87-96, one sees a complete change of the research, and it's fair to say that in those days one turned the research upside down. One moved away from the traditional top-down perspectives on communication, and one started looking at more participatory attempts, community media, small-scale kind of communication exercises. In the last phase, which is again being documented, 97-2005, there is a re-emergence of the modernization perspective, but now it comes under the umbrella of technology issues. So you could say that technological determinism, which has always been part of the modernization perspective, is once again providing some arguments and some perspectives to researchers who study this, but the perspectives which are more alternative are still very much available as well. So what the future brings is, of course, to be seen, but I think that it's fair to say that we are still looking for a definite final answer to what development and communication is about. We are still very much doing both traditional as well as more innovative work, and the role of new technologies is definitely part of the future research. That brings me to my second part, mapping the future. I'll once again won't elaborate here, but I think that there are at least 5 concepts or elements worth mentioning. First of all, we have become more and more interdisciplinary. We are no longer economists studying economic development, political scientists studying political developments in societies, and any of the other sciences. We try to do that in an interdisciplinary way, and of course from our own original discipline perspective, but we cannot do without borrowing from other disciplines, and that also includes definitely when it comes to communication technologies, the computer science, the natural sciences, and all the sciences, in other words. The second aspect, again, as I already hinted at, the changes in the theoretical perspectives, the power of culture, the impact of culture, the complexity of culture has become more and more prominent in our debates and considerations, and I think that it will continue given the current world stage, the political situation, the discussions going on, etc. Will that lead to a reinvention of modernization, going back to the past, so to speak, or will that bring other ways of looking at modernization, modernization which is less Western, modernization which is much more multiple, different characteristics, etc. That's to be seen. One thing which I think is definitely going to happen is, and at the fourth and the fifth level, on the one hand, we go back after the nation state was declared dead, we go back to an assessment of the role of nation states, of national governments. They still have an important role to play, although, as we all know, we have now become part of a regional configuration and a world society. And that brings me to my fifth point. We are trying to assess all of this in varied ways, but by taking, on the one hand, a global perspective and a local perspective. And in my own argumentation and work, I'll try to look at the global from a local perspective, which is a slightly different way of looking at it than many companies and economists do, because they look at the impact of global impact on local environments. That brings me to the third point of the paper, and I had prepared a bit of a video document of 12 minutes, but I'm not gonna show this for those interested. That can be done afterwards. But what I wanted to highlight is that all this is relevant for our current day discussions, and I therefore wanted to position that in the context of the debate of the Millennium Development Goals. I'm sure that most of you know what these are, but just for everybody to recall, it's a goal set for 2015, so we are about halfway. They are set for each individual country. If you go to their websites, you'll find out what that means for your country and where your country is still behind certain objectives, etc. But the goals are: eradicate extreme poverty and hunger, achieve universal primary education, promote gender equality and empower women, reduce child mortality, improve maternal